Hello ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses, and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today I'm going to be doing my Premier League predictions, and yes, I am aware that the first weekend of fixtures has already been complete, but I did plan the video before those fixtures and I've tried not to let it influence any of my decision making going into this video. I did plan to get it out last week, but some things popped up and I wasn't able to do so, but I'm getting it out now, so I hope you enjoy it. So first things first, let's talk about 20th place, which is the position that no one wants to be in, let's be honest. And unfortunately, I have put Ipswich down there. I think that there's a lot of people who actually think they're going to stay up this year, but I've got them in a similar bracket to Luton in terms of they weren't really expected to come up from the Championship. They're massive underdogs going into this season, and I think it's going to be a bit too much for them. They've done some decent business. Jacob Greaves, I think, is going to be a really good player. I think he's definitely got Premier League potential. Amori Hutchinson, they've signed permanently, who they had last year on loan, who is obviously hopefully going to continue that form for them. And the likes of Leif Davis at left back as well, I expect to have a good year too. But overall, I just think their squad lacks that Premier League quality. They've got a lot of players who were with them in League One, which I don't think bodes well, and I just don't see the depth in that squad to be able to compete, especially when they get those inevitable injuries. I don't know if the players who are going to come in are going to be good enough to be able to keep up any sort of form to keep them in the league. And also, I don't doubt that Kieran McKenna is a good manager, but I think he's going to try and keep that possession-based style that he had last year in the Championship, and I don't know if it's going to work, as we've seen in previous years. Literally last season with Burnley, they tried to keep a possession-based system under Company, and it just doesn't work in the Premier League because the calibre of players isn't enough to be able to keep up with the standard. And to be fair, I can't see why some people have them staying up, because in the past few days as well, they've signed some decent Premier League players. Obviously Calvin Phillips, who's struggled in recent years, but he's proven in the past that he does have that ability, so I think he could be good for them. And also Sammy Schmodics as well. It's going to be interesting to see whether he can step up and keep that form that he had in the Championship over the last couple of years. But overall, I just don't think they've got enough, unfortunately, and I think they might go straight back down. But it's going to be an experience for them, and they can take it as another building year and then hopefully bounce back up when they do go back down. Then moving on to 19th place, and I have another one of the newly promoted sides in Southampton. And they came up through the playoffs last year, and let's be honest, they really should have come up automatically. They had that spot nailed down, and then their collapse towards the back end of the season meant that they had to come up through the playoffs. And I wonder whether that lack of bottle that they showed in that Championship season is going to carry through into the Premier League, and that might be one of the biggest factors in them not getting enough points, because they're not going to be able to have that bottle to win the games that they really need to stay up against those sides in and around that relegation places. Again, like I mentioned with Ipswich, Russell Martin likes to play a possession-based system, and we've seen in the past it doesn't really work unless you've got the calibre of player who can do so. And looking at that Southampton squad, again, I just don't see it. I think it's a Championship level squad. There's obviously players there again who should step up. The likes of Kyle Walker-Peters, I think, will have a good year for them. But overall, I just don't think they've got enough depth, enough quality, and I think it's going to be a tough season for Southampton. One of the positions that they lack the most depth in is in goal, with Gavin Bazunu out injured. That really only leaves Alex McCarthy and a couple of other more unknown names in there. So I think they could really need to sign a goalkeeper unless Bazunu makes a magical recovery, but I'm pretty sure he's out for at least a good few months. And I think it's really going to cost them not having a goalkeeper, because a lot of times one of the things, like last year with Luton, the only reason they really had a chance was because Thomas Kaminski was absolutely unbelievable. So I think if they don't sign a goalkeeper and they have to play with Alex McCarthy, I think that really could cost them this year as well. And it's just yet another reason why I don't think they're going to have enough. On the other side of that though, in recent days they have signed some Premier League calibre players, or at least what I think are, likes of Cameron Archer, who hasn't really proven himself yet, but I think if they can get service to him, then he will score goals in this division. They've also got Leslie Ugachukwu, who they've just signed on loan from Chelsea, who I think is a really good player, and I think if they do stay up, he could be one of the biggest catalysts to do so, because he's going to bring a stability to that midfield, and that's one of the main things that promoted sides struggle with. They struggle with being able to regulate the game, and Ugachukwu is really good at that, so I wonder whether if they do stay up, he could be a big part of it. But overall, I just don't, again, it's just the squad quality. I just don't think it's there, and Southampton are probably going to struggle again for me and finish 19th. Then moving on to 18th place, and unfortunately I have the third newly promoted side, and that is Leicester City. And let's be honest, a points deduction looks pretty much inevitable for them now. They're going to get a similar amount to what Everton and Forest did, and I don't expect that they'll be able to get that reduced like Everton did last year. So for that reason alone, really, I've got them getting relegated, because I think if they didn't have that points deduction, they'd genuinely have a really good chance of staying up. They've got Premier League experience in that squad. There's still players there from a few years ago. Obviously, 37-year-old Jamie Vardy, but he does have that experience and he is able to score goals. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see him score a few again this year. I think keeping Wilfred Ndidi was really good for them. He's going to add stability to that midfield. He knows how to play in the Premier League, so that's going to be really big for them. They've recently signed, or I think it's rumoured that they're signing Oliver Skipp as well, who's going to give them 7, 8 out of 10 performances every week. So I think he's going to be a very good addition to the squad too. There's players I like in all areas of the squad. Defensively, they've obviously got Wout Faes and Ricardo Pereira as well, who again have that Premier League experience. I think they're both going to be good. James Justin too is a very good player. He's proven that before when he's played in the Premier League. They've also signed Caleb Okoli as an extra option at centre half, who I think could be a good astute signing for them. In midfield, obviously, as I mentioned, maybe signing Oliver Skipp. They've got Harry Winks as well, so they know each other from playing at Spurs, and that could be a bit of chemistry that could really help them out. Wilfred Ndidi, keeping him again, like I mentioned, is a very good coup for them. Going forward, they do have a few issues, I think, in terms of goal scoring ability. Obviously, 37-year-old Jamie Vardy is going to be nowhere near the level he was when they were last in the Premier League. Patson Daka looks like he's going to be injured for a good few months, and he's never really hit the potential that people maybe expected him to have. Fatawu and Mavididi are both good players. I like both of them. Obviously, they've signed Bobby Decordova-Reid as well from Fulham, who is a decent Premier League player with some experience. So it's not all doom and gloom, and overall, I think it's quite a well-rounded squad. I don't think there's necessarily a big area apart from maybe up front where they're going to struggle. And I also don't really mind Steve Cooper as a manager either. I think this could be a little bit of a redemption for him after getting sacked by Forest. And overall, Leicester have proven in the past, as we know, that they can pull out a miracle. So maybe don't be shocked if they do so again. I do think they'll just about go down, but hey, you never know. In 17th place, I have Everton, and I'm going to be honest, I just don't really like the squad. They've lost Amadou Onana, who I think is going to be a big miss, but they have also signed some decent players as well. I'll be honest, the likes of Iliman and Dye, who I think is going to be very good for them. Lindstrom as well, who looks like he's going to be a decent player. And as we know from last year, they're going to play some very solid defensive football, but I just don't see them scoring enough goals to finish any higher than this. If I'm honest, Dominic Calvert-Lewin looks like he's basically done now in terms of any run of form. Beto's not hit the ground running how they might have liked. I'll be interested to see how Yusuf Chermiti does this year, because I think he could be good for them in the future, but it's whether he's able to hit the ground running if Dyche does decide to bring him in. And then onto the point of Sean Dyche, I think if it goes a little bit wrong at the start of the season, we could see him get sacked pretty early on, which I don't think would be the right move at all, because we know he's got that pedigree of being able to keep sides who shouldn't be in the league. But I can see a world where he gets sacked and they kind of just start to struggle from there. Jared Branthwaite obviously could still go in this window, could go in January if things aren't going all the way to plan. So overall, I just don't think it looks particularly good for Everton. Now the next team I have here, who I think are going to finish in 16th place, is Nottingham Forest. And I think there's definitely quality in the squad. They've not signed a lot this year, so it's kind of the same bunch of players that they had. And I think that actually could be good for them, because it's going to provide some sort of stability. It's going to allow Espirito Santo to kind of mould those players into what he wants from them, which he didn't really have a chance to do last year, I don't think. They have signed Elliot Anderson, who I really like. I expect Elliot Anderson to play very well this year. Maybe there's a little bit of Newcastle bias going on there, but I think he's going to be very good for them, so watch out for him. Going forward, they've always had decent players. Anthony Elanga and Callum Hudson-Odoi are both exciting wingers who can create things. Chris Wood up front has been performing for them, so fair enough. Maybe they don't need another striker, but I do think that maybe if he doesn't perform, they don't have a lot behind that. Awani's not really come back from his injury in the way they would have liked. Overall, it's just defensively where I fear for them a little bit. Their goalkeeper trio being Matt Sells, Matt Turner and Carlos Miguel, who they've just signed. That doesn't really fill me with much confidence. So it's going to be whether they can keep out enough goals to keep them in the league. The City Ground is a difficult place to go. So they're going to pick up points at home no matter what. It's just whether they can hold their form on the road away from home and maybe pick up enough points to keep them up. I think Nuno Espirito Santo I'm not sure about him as a manager, but I think the quality of the squad, when you look at some of the other sides around them, is going to be enough to keep them up once again. Hopefully they're going to have a bit of stability this year, and I think they're probably once again just hoping for survival to maybe then build next year. Then in 15th, I have Brentford. Maybe seems a little bit harsh considering their performance over the last couple of years, but it looks like they're going to lose Ivan Toney. Maybe that's going to be a blessing for them in disguise because it allows them to have that more fluid front three. Obviously, Mbeumo is going to be crucial whether they can keep him. It looks like they're going to, and if they do so, then I think he's going to play a big part. Yohan Wissa as well performed last year. Can he replicate the form? We'll soon find out. I think having Kevin Schade back is going to be big for them because I really like him. I think he could do some good things for them this year. I do think we could see points of this year where Brentford do look like they're in a bit of trouble though. I think if they do stay up, the person who's going to keep them up is Thomas Frank. And now that might seem a little bit obvious because obviously he's their manager, but I think he's proven that he's very tactically adept, especially with the calibre of players he's got. He's able to get the most out of them, and he has done for years on end now. But overall, they should have enough quality in the squad to stay up once again. Again, if Toney goes, Mbeumo might also leave in January possibly, which would be a big blow for them, and then I think it could be a bit ropey, but they should have enough really. I don't think it'll be this year, but I do think they're on a little bit of a slippery slope at the minute. They've been going backwards year upon year, so they could find themselves down there in the battle. Then in 14th I have Wolves, and I think they could really struggle this year. They've lost two of their bigger players in Max Kilman and Pedro Neto, and I think they're both going to be massive blows for them. But there is still quality there. I really like Mateus Cunha. I think he's going to have another big year for them this year. João Gomez in midfield is obviously a very good player as well, and it is defensively where I fear for them the most, if I'm honest. Totti isn't a bad centre-half, but I think he sometimes looks vulnerable in the back four. He definitely favours playing in a back three, so he's got that extra cover. Mosquera is a decent signing, but he's also a bit erratic at times, so I wonder whether there could maybe be a bit too much chaos in that defensive system for it to really work and be sustainable. In a game, one of the most important things is they've got an adept manager in Gary O'Neill. He's proven that he is a good manager in the past, and I think he'll do so again. I think he's able to adapt to whatever situation comes his way, so if they do find themselves in a difficult spot, I hope they don't get rid of him, because I do think he'll be able to pull them out of there, and which is why I think they'll finish 14th. I don't think they'll quite get dragged into that relegation battle. There could be points where they are down there scrapping a bit, but I think eventually it'll even out and they'll end up in around about 14th position. Now 13th might seem a little bit low for Palace, and it could well turn out to be the case, but I think a lot can be said for their hot form last season being because of that new manager bounce that they got with Glasner. They've lost Elise, possibly even Gehi, who could be on his way out as well. Joachim Andersen has also now gone to Fulham for around £30 million, and the players that they've brought in, the likes of Charlie Riyad and Ismail Assar, are good signings, but let's be honest, they're not quite of that same calibre. They've been linked with Maxime Lacroix, I don't know if I've said that right, from Wolfsburg in the past few weeks as well, if Gehi does end up going, and I do really think they could need some reinforcements in that centre-half position, especially if both Gehi and Andersen have left by the end of the window. I think there's a big question around Jean-Philippe Mateta and whether he can continue that ridiculously hot run of form that he had at the back end of last year, and I don't think he's going to keep it up to the same extent, which is why I think they might finish a bit lower. And obviously they've lost the goals from Elise as well, so I think Eze is going to have to step up massively this year. Odsonne Edouard off the bench is going to have to contribute more than he had done last year as well, and I just wonder whether it all might not come together as Palace fans might expect this year. And then in 12th position I have Fulham, and I'm slightly worried about the lack of strengthening that they've done this year, especially in that midfield position when they lost Palhinha, who was a massive part, an integral part of that system that Marco Silva likes to play. Obviously, like I mentioned in the Palace section, they've just signed Joachim Andersen, who's going to add something to that back line. It's going to be interesting to see whether Rodrigo Muniz can pick up his form again and start scoring goals, but overall they're going to have a solid structure. We know that, we've seen that before with Marco Silva. They're going to be able to play in transition very well, which we've seen again in the past. They do like to play on the counter-attack, and I think that could favour the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe, who they've brought in. It's going to be interesting to see how he fares, whether he can hit the ground running after about 2 years of not really playing regular football. But if they can get him involved in the play and get him firing, then they're going to score goals. That's a given. But yeah, like I said, my only real problem with this Fulham outfit this year is that there's no longer a João Palhinha there who's going to anchor that midfield. So it might be a little bit of a system change to maybe a double pivot to give them a little bit of more stability. But overall, they should be fine. 12th would be a decent season for them again, and maybe a stability season to allow them to push further up the table next year. Then in 11th place we have Bournemouth, and I'm going to set my stall out early with this one. I really like this Bournemouth squad, and I do genuinely think they could maybe finish a little bit higher than this as well at their peak, because Iraola has been really good over the last couple of years with that squad building, and I now think if you look at it, they've got a very well-rounded squad. They've got young, exciting players in pretty much every area of the pitch, and I think this could be a really exciting year for Bournemouth fans. I think it's worth noting that a lot of their signings from last year missed a lot of the season through injury as well, so having them back is obviously going to be a boost to them. They've also added to the squad with the likes of Dean Howson, who I think is a really good player. I think he could be a world beater in the next few years if he's nurtured right, so expect him to have a very good breakout year in the Premier League this year. Julian Araujo as well, who hasn't really hit the heights that maybe he was expected to, but again, he's only 23, and I think he's another player who could flourish in Iraola's system. Overall, after a very positive season last year, you've managed to strengthen the squad, which is the main thing, and I think that could bode for once again a very good season this year. I think they're going to finish around a similar position, but I think it could be slightly different in terms of I think there's probably going to be points where they're pushing into those European places, so don't be surprised if you see Bournemouth finish 11th or even maybe higher. Then in 10th place I have West Ham, and they've just got a new manager in Lopetegui. It's going to be interesting to see how West Ham cope with not having David Moyes for the first time in however many years, and I actually think that it could be a slightly disappointing season and maybe not quite as good as West Ham fans would expect this year under Lopetegui. They've made some good signings, but at the same time I don't know whether those players make them European shoo-ins. The likes of Jean-Claire Todibo is going to be very good, but again he's not proven in the Premier League, so it's going to be interesting to see whether he can hit the ground running. Max Kilman I think is a very solid signing as well. I expect him to definitely add something to that back line. Fulkrug I expect to do well too, but I think it could be a little while before we see him really start to score goals, and I do expect him to still share minutes with Mikel Antonio, which might make it a little bit more difficult for him to get going properly. Somerville is a good option as well, but feels more like a reinforcement than a starter to me, and Luis Guilherme looks like a very good player for the future. Obviously we're not going to see a lot of him this year, but I think we could see moments of brilliance from him if he does get on the pitch. And yeah, overall I think it could honestly be a season of anything for West Ham. They could push up into those European spots, or they could falter a little bit and finish mid-table, maybe even slightly below that. I think Lopetegui's too good of a manager to let them slip too far, which is why I think they'll finish around that mid-table sort of position, and I think it could be a season of maybe trying to stabilise again for West Ham and then push on maybe next year into those European spots once again. Now moving on to 9th place, and I have put Brighton in 9th, and I was a little bit worried for them when De Zerbi left, but in fairness to Hurtzella, he's come in, he's made some extremely good signings. The squad does look improved on what it was last year, in my opinion at least, so I think it's going to be another good season for Brighton, and they're another one who could quite easily push into those European places if the sides above them begin to falter and maybe have a few failures down the line. It's also difficult to doubt them when as soon as they're struggling, they'll just go and bring in 3 random new wonder kids that you've never heard of in your life, and they'll come in and hit the ground running and be world beaters as soon as they step foot on the pitch. I expect it to be a bit of a season of mourning for me and all the Newcastle fans, with Yankuba Minteh now looking like he's going to be exactly the player that all Newcastle fans thought he would be. He looks extremely good. Matavaifa as well adds something to that Brighton squad that they didn't really have last year in terms of that midfield stability. He's going to provide an anchor to that midfield and allow the more creative players to go and play their own game. And yeah, like I said, Brighton are another side who could push into the European spots, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them a bit higher than this, especially if the likes of maybe Chelsea, maybe Man United falter again this year. I think Brighton are definitely going to be there to capitalise, so don't be surprised if you see them a bit higher, but at the same time, a lot's changed at the club this season, so don't be surprised if you also see them a little bit lower. But again, this is the sort of the part of the table which is very difficult to predict. Anybody could finish anywhere because all of the squads are so close together. Then in 8th position I've got Man United, and I think a lot of people will have them higher than this, but I just look at the squad and nothing excites me or inspires me to put them any higher. 8th position seems like a good place for this squad. They have made signings. I expect Matthias de Ligt to be very good for them. He's going to add a bit of defensive stability which they didn't have last year because they did struggle in transition at times. I also expect Xerxes to be a solid signing. It's going to be interesting to see whether he can finally live up to that potential that he had earlier on in his career, and also I wonder wonder how Ten Hag's going to handle their sharing minutes between him and Højlund when he comes back from injury. So he does like to drop in a bit more as a striker, so I wonder whether it's going to be a case of maybe playing both of them in certain games. And if that's the case, they could be caught out of position again like they were last year in transition, which is one of their biggest problems. And yeah, it is a sort of chaotic style that we've become accustomed to in the past few years under Ten Hag, and I don't think that's going to bode well for him this year if he does continue to play like that. Again, they got caught out in transition a lot last year. They have strengthened defensively, but I really think they need a holding midfielder because the stability issues in there last year with Casemiro, who looked like his legs are gone. Obviously, he has kind of had a little bit of a resurgence during this pre-season, but again, I think you need more young blood in there who's going to be able to be that anchor and provide that stability to allow the other players to go and play, like I mentioned with Brighton before. And yeah, they could definitely push higher into those European spots. I don't think it's going to be a season where they get into the Champions League or title contenders by any means, which is why I have them 8th, because I think all of the sides above them, I think they've got a better chance of getting into those European spots. So Man United are 8th. Now on to Villa, who are having 7th, and I think this is just going to be a similar season to what Newcastle had last year in terms of trying to juggle Champions League and Premier League, and I don't know if they've quite got the depth in that squad and the quality in that squad to be able to cope with it, but then again, 7th is going to be a good season. I can see them having a decent season in the Premier League, having a decent run in the Champions League, and then maybe also winning a trophy as well, because I do like the squad. They've made some good signings. I like Onana. I think he's going to thrive. I think he's the sort of player who plays better with better players around him, which is why I think he's going to perform better than he did when he was at Everton. Also, Ian Maatsen as well definitely adds something to those fullback positions. He can play either side, which is going to be crucial for them. But on the other side of it, with their outgoings, they've lost the likes of Douglas Luiz, who's going to play for Juventus, and Moussa Diaby, who's gone off to Saudi Arabia in what can only be described as a money move. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they fill those holes. Samuel Illan Jr. has come in on the wing, who is possibly going to be the replacement for Diaby coming off the bench, and he's an exciting player, so don't be surprised if you see him shine a bit as well this year. But overall, I think one of the keys, if they are going to have a better season than I think they're going to have, is getting Boubacar Kamara back, because they've now lost Douglas Luiz, so they don't really have that out and out pivot. Onana can play there, but he's not as effective as he is when he's going forward, so I think getting Boubacar Kamara back is going to be really integral to how they do perform this year. And I also don't believe they're as light up top as people are saying they are, because obviously if Ollie Watkins gets injured, a lot of people are saying that they're going to struggle to score goals, but I'm telling you, John Duran could be a special player. I've got a real soft spot for John Duran, so if Ollie Watkins does get injured, John Duran's going to come in and John Duran is going to score goals. I can almost guarantee it. In 6th now, I have Chelsea, and I think it's crazy that we've got to the point where putting them in 6th is a bold prediction because people expect them to finish lower. But I do think they're going to do a little bit better than people expect under Maresca this year. I made a TikTok about this the other day, but I feel like he's a sort of manager who they kind of need to guide them through this period, because he's not afraid to make decisions at all. He's going to do what he feels is best for the team. He's going to mould the squad in his way, like he said the other day. There's 21, 22 players who he has in his training sessions, and 15 to 20 are training by themselves. So he's clearly whittled that squad down to who he feels have the best sort of attitudes and the best sort of play style to match what he wants, which I think is really going to help them this year, because it's going to add that little bit of stability that they haven't had in recent years. And it's not going to be an easy task for him by any means, but he doesn't seem to be fazed by any sort of volatility that might arise by upsetting players, which is exactly what Chelsea need. I'm not saying they're going to hit the ground running necessarily, because again, there's a lot of sorting out that needs to be done there, and there'll be points this year where there is pressure on them to perform, but overall I think it's probably going to even out, and they might do a similar thing to what they did last year under Pochettino, struggle at points but then kind of bring it back towards the end, and I think they'll finish in 6th once again. Then I have Newcastle United in 5th, and a lot of people are writing us off this year, and I'm not really sure why. Last year, the only reason we finished as low as we did was because we had Champions League football as well, and our squad really struggled to cope with that, with the injuries. This year, we've only got the Premier League to focus on, so naturally there's going to be a bit of an uprising there. As well, we've managed to keep our most important players, which was the main thing this year, especially after missing out on European football last year, the likes of Isak, Bruno Guimaraes. We've managed to keep that whole squad together, which is definitely going to be a benefit. And I know there's not been many incomes in terms of the transfer window, but let's not forget Sandro Tonali's coming back from his ban on the 28th of August, and from everything I've seen, everything people have said, Eddie Howe and the players, they've all kind of conveyed that Tonali looks extremely good and he looks ready to come back with a bang, so don't be surprised if you see him play a massive part in Newcastle's success this year. You've also got players who we signed last year who've had a bit more of a bedding in period, young players like Livramento and Lewis Hall. Both fullbacks are now probably going to be starters, and that'll add a bit more defensive stability to what we had last year, which was one of the areas we struggled, let's be honest. We do definitely need to sign a centre-half though, because Shaw's just gone and got himself banned for 3 games, which isn't great. Botman's injured for however long, which kind of leaves Dan Burn and Lloyd Kelly as our only 2 centre-half options, so we definitely need to go out and sign another one of them. But if we do so, and we sign a winger, like is possible, I definitely think there's a chance we do push for Champions League football, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get it, because I think that England might get the extra Champions League spot this year, so 5th could be a Champions League place, and I think Newcastle are going to get it. Then in the first of the Champions League spots, I have Spurs, and now I'm making this video, I think 4th might be slightly too high, maybe a couple of positions too high, especially when we look at the business they've done. Obviously they've signed Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, who yes have lots of potential, but they're not the sort of first team starters that you might have expected them to sign this year, especially if they're looking to push on into those Champions League spots. But then again, I say they haven't had a great window, but they've probably filled the biggest hole that they had last year in terms of that striker position, signing Dominic Solanke for £65 million. A lot of that success will likely depend on whether Dominic Solanke is able to hit the ground running and score goals. I mean, last year was the first season he really did score a lot of goals in the Premier League, so it's going to be interesting to see whether that was him just running hot or with form, or whether he's going to be able to keep that up. But then again, he's going to get more chances created for him in this Spurs side, so I do think he will be a good signing for Spurs overall. Overall though, I think the main thing to note is that Ange Postecoglou is building something at Spurs, and I do think they're going to get better year upon year. Last season they just missed out on those Champions League spots. This year I think they're going to get them, and 4th place it is. Then on to 3rd place, and once again I have Liverpool finishing there. I think it could be a little bit of a transitional season for Liverpool. Obviously Klopp has gone and Slot has come in, but there is some similarities there between their play styles, so I don't think it'll affect their on the pitch performances too much. They still haven't actually signed anyone, which would be a problem if their squad wasn't so good already. I do think they possibly need to buy an out and out 6 if possible, but they do have players who can fill that role if they don't manage to sign one this year. The likes of Gravenberch, who hasn't really had that many minutes at Liverpool, I think could shine if he is put into that sort of role. Overall, Arne Slot is a bit of an unknown quantity really. I think the fact that the board haven't backed him can mean one of 2 things. It can mean that either they are literally unable to back him and they don't have the money to do so, or it can mean that Arne Slot's come in and is comfortable with the squad that he's already got, which I do think would bode well for Liverpool, because that clearly means that there's not going to be a lot of changes to that style of play, and they are going to be able to keep the same core that they've had in previous years that served them so well. I do expect them to be some way off the top 2, but I think they could find themselves in a bit of no man's land by the end of the season. I think they could be quite a way ahead of 4th place, but they could be quite a way behind 2nd place, and I think that would be a good season for Liverpool, especially considering they probably need to do a little bit of consolidating with Arne Slot now coming in. Then on to the top 2, the same top 2 that have been the top 2 for the past couple of years. The question is, who do I have win the league? Well, we'll do 2nd first, and 2nd I have Arsenal, which means that once again Manchester City have won the league and have made it 5 in a row. Overall, I just don't know whether Arsenal are going to be able to continue to put the pressure on Manchester City, and I think the exhaustion of trying to keep up with a side like Man City might take a toll on them this year, and they might fall off and labour a little bit. I don't necessarily think this will even be down to Arsenal performing particularly badly this year. I just think, as we've seen in the past with Liverpool, the sheer amount of effort it takes to even keep up with Man City for one season, never mind like 3 or 4, and also then to try and win a Premier League as well, I think eventually it's just going to take its toll. Like we've seen with Liverpool, they fell off a little bit once that kind of battle with Manchester City was over. I think we could see a similar thing with Arsenal this year, but I do think their squad's too good to fall any further than just a little bit further behind Manchester City. I think it would have been different if they had gone out and signed a real killer up front who's going to score you 20 goals a season. I expect Havertz to once again have a high output season, but he's not an out and out full on striker who you know is going to score you 20 goals. He's more of a fluid striker who's going to bring other players into play, whereas I think if they'd gone and got a focal point who they know is going to score goals, then they would definitely be a lot better off this year. And I mean, there's still scope for them to do so. There's still a week left of the window, but there's not really many rumours of that anymore. So I think Arsenal, for that reason, are going to fall further behind Man City. And then that leaves Manchester City in first, like I've said, and it's probably the boring and obvious choice, but at this point I think it's inevitable. They've literally made 90-point title winning seasons the norm, and now that's the expectation. So anybody who wants to beat them has to make that the expectation, and I don't know if anybody's got the ability to do so. There hasn't been much business done, but then again, I don't think City are in the sort of place where they need to do any. They've signed Savinho, who I think is going to be a very good addition to that squad. I think the way that City play leaves a player like Savinho no other choice but to shine, so expect him to have a breakout year this year in the Premier League. There's not even really a lot else to say, to be honest. If City win the league this year, they make it 5 in a row, and I think it's going to take something ridiculously special from another side to get anywhere near them. This year, next year, maybe even the year after that. It might even take a Leicester City type season. It might take someone to come out of absolutely nowhere and just have an absolutely unbelievable year to win the league off them, because 5 in a row, it's sort of getting to the point where they're making every other side who's got hope of winning the title lose hope. Now it's more of a battle for top 4 than anything. It's kind of a foregone conclusion that City are going to win the league. But with that, I come to the end of my Premier League prediction video. I'll do a video at the end of the season revisiting it all and going over my predictions, unless it goes absolutely horribly wrong and I get absolutely nothing right. Then I might just pretend it never happened. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment down below with any of your Premier League predictions as well, and whether you think I got this right or whether you think I've maybe got it horribly wrong. And I will see you in the next video.